Dice, yeah, ay, ay.
Good day and welcome. I am William, narrator for the FYI I Am Damaged podcast. What if Happily Ever After isn't about never fighting, but about what you do when the panic hits? Dr. Bruce Chalmer, a psychologist, author, podcaster, and couples therapist who's spent decades helping partners stay in the same team when everything in them wants to run or shut down. His framework for relationships: be kind, don't panic, and have faith. What that actually looks like when there's betrayal, disconnection, or years of resentment, and why faith in this context has nothing to do with ideology and everything to do with humility, curiosity, and seeing your partner as an actual person again. This is the FYI I Am Damaged podcast. Now a word from our sponsor.
Meet Logan, the strong-minded little elephant who learns that bravery isn't about being fearless. It's about believing in yourself even when you're scared. In this beautifully illustrated story, friends follow Logan through a colorful jungle as he learns to calm his worries, take deep breaths, and remind himself, I am strong, I am safe, I can do this. It's a story that helps kids, and maybe a few grown-ups too, find courage, mindfulness, and strengthen their hearts. Logan, the strong-minded little elephant, by me, Oscar Luna. Available now at all major retailers and my publisher's bookstore, Milton and Hugo. Because it's up to every parent to show that their child deserves to know that strength starts from within.
Bruce Chalmer, thank you for joining me on another episode of FYI I Am Damaged. Happy to have you here.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me on.
You've been a psychologist, author, podcaster, composer, and community leader. How do you describe what you do for people?
Wow, that's a great, sort of putting all those things together. I mean, as far as the couples therapist part, I help people find ways to live their lives that work for them better. And all the rest of that stuff, it's, the various callings that you referred to there, they all have something to do, I guess, with that concept of calling. The stuff that feels like the stuff I feel really alive doing, all of those things in that list apply to that. So I love doing therapy with folks. I love writing, and I've just recently developed some video courses. I love doing that. I just enjoy that stuff. The podcast I do with my wife, we keep doing because we keep having fun doing it. So it's stuff that makes me feel alive, and alive in the sense of meaningful. It all feels meaningful to me.
Now, early in your career, you answered a colleague's question about couples therapy with be kind, don't panic, and have faith. When did you realize that line was the backbone to your work?
That's a great question. I realized as soon as I said it, probably close to 30 years ago, I realized, well, that's kind of a way of summarizing what I do. Wasn't until I started making videos, which I'm thinking is probably about 15 years ago now. It's funny. I'm at the age where if I think something was 10 years ago, it's probably 15. So I was thinking 10, it's probably 15. A while ago, I started making videos just because I enjoyed that. I just said, there's some stuff that I talk with the folks I work with a lot, and it just seemed to be useful stuff to do. And the very first video I made I decided to call it Couples Therapy in 7 words. And those are the 7 words. Be kind, don't panic, you have to count and. Be kind, don't panic, and have faith. Because that's sort of, it's ridiculously oversimple, right? It's not like that says everything about it, but there is a logic to that formula that just made sense to me. It really, if you think about it, be kind. I don't just mean be nice to each other. Yes, we should all be nice to each other. I mean, be kin. A couple that still feels like they're in the same team feels like they're kin. Even if they're annoyed with each other, they still feel like kin. It's hard to do that when you're in a panic, especially if you're in a panic because you're worried your partner has, betrayed you or hurt you somehow or something like that. And the antidote to panic is faith. And I don't mean necessarily religious faith. In fact, there's some forms of religious faith I think are the opposite of what I'm talking about. It's a faith that says this whole living business is somehow right to be what it is, even though it's painful sometimes. That's how you can get through hard stuff without crossing over into panic. Anxiety, yes, but panic, no. So that's sort of how they all fit together, those three concepts.
No, and that's a very powerful statement, and I'm glad that it is the backbone of your work. A lot of couples are going through a lot, and it's that kind of got my attention when you said about panic and everything. Like, God knows I've been through that before. Like, I was married and divorced in my 20s, and then from out of there I met my current wife, and it's when you're in your 20s, it's and something's going on, it's almost nothing but panic.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
what
Well,
about
you
this? What
haven't got a
about
lot of
that?
perspective. Yeah.
Exactly. A lot of, and very minimal experience, and doing something like marriage at a young age, I don't recommend it.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's for somebody, then okay. Yeah. But it's a lot more work than you're aware of. And people think that, hey, that honeymoon period where they're on or off the marriage, it's something that feels nice, but when you get into the work, it's like, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah, because, as you mentioned, yes, the honeymoon period, you don't see the challenges that are to come when you realize that that other person is actually a separate person. And,
Yeah.
the things you've been, because when you first meet someone, all you really have is illusions. I don't mean that in a cynical way. It's just you barely know them. You have what you have, and we fill in the blanks with whatever we think. And when you're really infatuated with someone, you fill in the blanks with everything just perfectly wonderful and compatible. And then you discover it's an actual other person who differs from you. And the couples that do well are the ones that can celebrate the differences, can enjoy it. It's like, well, wow, that can be annoying, but I can really appreciate that. The differences. And of course, when you're talking about, well, any couple, regardless of whether they're same sex or opposite sex, any couple is going to have differences. And when you note that we look for people who aren't the same as us, then you're asking for those differences. And it's one of those couples therapist cliches that the stuff that you are attracted to originally is the stuff that ends up driving you nuts.
Yeah.
Often. And so again, the couples that can manage some perspective are the ones who can appreciate that and get through it, and even smile about it, have some humor about it. The couples that freak out about it are the ones who have a hard time staying together.
Yeah, like I've seen many couples go through, like, what fresh trauma is this, and it's that, we'll get to it about the communication part and all that, but it's you see all it's funny because when you live a life with other people and then you get older, you're like, wow, I wish I had this type of awareness back then. Hindsight is 2020, all that stuff, but it's just like wow, like if I knew what I knew now, I would be a way better person, but to a different person. But then it's like, well, I like the life that I'm in now.
Yeah.
Like, okay, work
And
on that life.
the life that you're in now is the end result of the life you've had up to now. So it's not like, I could go back and say, oh, gee, I wish I had so much more experience when I was in my 20s, but I couldn't have. I wouldn't have been a person in my 20s. I had to be who I was, which was right to be. That's kind of my general definition of faith. When I talk about faith, it's that reality's right to be what it was. You were right to be the person you were all the way through.
Yeah.
Mistakes and all. We all make them, but we're right to be who we are.
No, you're right. And when I was coming up with these questions and everything, and I just looked, I said, you know what? And I see that, and it's not trying to route it into like a risk perspective. And I'm like, it's always having faith in yourself, so that's what, I came to it, and I'm like, yeah, I see where you were going with it. Now, you and your wife, Judy, co-host Couples Therapy in 7 words. What has sitting behind the podcast mic taught you that 30 years in therapy didn't?
Wow. Well, you could probably relate to this, I imagine. We learn so much from our guests. And, it's not just our guests, because I'd say roughly half, maybe a little over half of our, I think up to now we've done 239 episodes, I believe. I think this was the last one. And so a little over half of those have been with a guest. And then the other half have just been Judy and me. And even when we've just talked with each other, we learn because we have two different points of view there. So we're bouncing around some ideas and we learn, especially when we invite in a guest. And of course, the guests we invite in, as much as you do, are guests who have written interesting things or have interesting stuff to talk about. So we just learn enormously from that. It's part of what keeps it fun to do.
I'm gonna bounce something off of you because I created, well, I came up with the name for another podcast, and I wanted that to be something that my wife and I could cultivate together. And she's like, well, you already have the mental health, mental strength side of the resilience side of, the podcast thing. And because I call it, because I gave it to somebody else, but they didn't use it. But I love the name. It's called Café con Mente podcast. So coffee with a side of mind kind of podcast. If you've ever deal with the Spanish culture, the café con leche, type of deal.
Yeah, café con leche, café con mente.
Yeah.
I don't speak Spanish, but I can fake it pretty good.
No, you did really well. I'm like, wait, what part are you Spanish?
I can fake the accent. Sorry, I don't speak Spanish, but but I know I can understand café con mente.
And I want to get her going to like start just being interested in it. I mean, she loves listening to my podcast. She loves listening to other podcasts, but I'm trying to let her know, like, look, you can actually now create content, have your 2 cents in it, and it doesn't have to be about mental health, but we're gonna sit down, have a coffee, and get to it and have, I guess, like a loosely based discussion. Same thing how you guys do, and like I want to get her interested in it. Like, so if she's listening to this, what kind of words would you have to say, hey, get your ass in the chair and start talking?
Well, of course, I don't know your wife, right? I would imagine, if she enjoys listening to your podcast, so that's a good sign right there. And you're wanting her to do it, which is a good sign, which says you're imagining you would have interesting conversations and it would be fun, right? And those two things go together. When people are talking, we get a lot of feedback, Judy and I, about our podcast. And what they most pick up is our chemistry. People will see, oh, you guys really enjoy this. We enjoy being with each other. We enjoy doing it. We enjoy bouncing around ideas and topics. And it's, it may be similar to your situation. Again, I don't know your wife and I don't know exactly all about you. Here we are meeting. But in our situation, we do have specific roles, like I'm the therapist. And we joke, I'm the therapist, she's the real person. She's actually a retired educator. So she's a career person and works, of course, being an educator. She was a principal of a school and teacher, and she worked with lots of folks. So she has a lot of experience working with people, but not as a therapist. So we have our respective roles. And what we're talking about is more my bailiwick than hers because I'm the couples therapist. So from that perspective, we just bounce ideas around. So if you and your wife wanted to go into it and just have conversations, have interesting conversations. You don't have to make them interesting, just have conversations and they'll be interesting if you're enjoying them. I think that's the key, is that you just enjoy, hearing each other's perspective and, whatever comes up, comes up.
Yeah, she actually, because I was sort of doing all these interviews and wondering like how I would be in an interview. So she surprised me with one for, my show. And she interviewed me. She's like, she's like, if people want to get to know you. So we had a nice little discussion. And so that kind of got me, like, I wanted her to do a podcast with her friend. She's always talking about healing and everything and in spirituality and in all sorts of other avenues. So I said, look, I mean, you got something here. So I keep telling them, like, please just do. And those who want to start, or who are listening to this and want to start a podcast, once you do the first episode, and you will see if you catch the bug, and just wanting to be like, I want to do more of these. I want to do more, because doing this from 2022 to now, and the changes that I've gone through, how I produce, how I ask questions, how I approach other individuals, how I even either don't promote myself or at least set myself up to be discovered. It's that journey, man. I don't know if you've gone through it as well. It's like, oh, doing this, doing that, and talking to different people. You're like, wow, and then you want to keep doing that. I said, baby, please, just do one, and watch. You're gonna catch the bug, and you're gonna see. I'm gonna look at you the way you look at me when you come into our home office and be like, oh, you're doing another interview. Oh, you're editing another show. Oh, you're doing this, you're doing that. You're always on Instagram, and so on and so forth. And I'm like, that's the point. It's I developed a passion out of a thought, out of an event that was haunting from a trauma so long ago. So it's like, it's been an awesome journey, and I'm glad that this is my passion while I have my career. And to bring it back to the things that you and your wife do, it should show people that if you have either a common denominator and you do something like this, or you're in support of the person doing their passion, which could be something like this, it strengthens a relationship like big time. Because I'm sure you guys are like solid as a rock.
Oh yeah, and of course, it's our doing it together is a reflection of that, and also, indeed, it supports that. And when you just said, your wife interviewed you, that was one of your episodes, was her interviewing you.
Yes.
So she's
Yes.
she's obviously got at least the inclination, if she thought of doing that, and obviously she's able to do it. She knows, not everybody's good at it, but sounds like she is. So there's a lot of encouragement right there. Yeah, and as you know, and certainly as I know, and as maybe your listeners know, the barrier to entry is pretty low for a podcast. It's not that hard to get one started, and there's some free services to get started with, or you don't have to spend very much money to do it. And it is a lot of fun. A lot of people enjoy them, and I can understand why.
Yeah, I tell people when they say, like, oh, I don't know what to do with the production. I see all these people have all the setup. I said I started audio first, and I tell people it's like I did my first episode driving down the FDR with my phone and just talking the intro, and I said just doing it, what I want the show to be, what I would love to give to the world, and blah blah blah. And I said I'm driving to work. I'm going to downtown Brooklyn. That's when I used to work for the FDNY, and I'm on the phone. I said, you know what? I said, F this. I'm gonna record it right now. I got about 45 minutes. I'm down the FDR, and you hear it. If you ever listen to it, or if anybody else listens, you hear it in the background, like me driving on the road. And I said I had to get it out. And when you have that sort of passion, whether it's in the beginning or you're in the throes of getting it started, and man, that feeling, I'm glad it's not like, chasing a dragon or anything like that, but it's like I can do this every day, and then you learn how to pull it back. Like, oh, it was eating a lot of my time, and because I have three boys, and I'm like, my wife was like, we did enough work for ourselves. She looked at me, she's like, how many days are you gonna do this on top of having a job, taking care of the house, dealing with me, and being there for your kids? And I was like, damn. I'm like, all right. So I cleared a space for myself to do these interviews, and I said, okay. I said, no. I said, you're right. You're right. I'm kind of stepping on my life's toes. Let me pull it back a bit. Then I told her, I said, that's what you learn, because she and a lot of other people that ask me podcast questions, I say, hey, look, you're gonna act like a rubber band. You're gonna know when to expand. You're gonna know when to contract, and work it around your life until it's to where you want it to be. And you don't have to compromise for anybody. And moving on, one of your book titles is It's Not About Communication. When couples say we just need to communicate better, what are you listening for underneath all of that?
Yeah. That is it's a very snarky title. You didn't mention the subtitle, which is even snarkier. Why everything you know about couples therapy is wrong. That's a snarky title. I had fun with that. So let me start by noting, couples come in, and almost always, I guess it's not always, but it's a large majority of the time, they are saying we need to communicate better. And I'm not saying they're crazy. Of course they want to communicate better. But what I notice often is what they think often, and what they will find from a lot of books, a lot of therapists, what they'll find is people will teach them tools for communication. They'll say, well, you need to learn how to communicate better. So you need, maybe you've heard of some of them, I statements rather than you statements, and active listening, and nothing wrong with any of those ideas. They're not bad ideas. The funny thing is, though, that the vast majority of people I work with are very effective at communicating. They don't need skills communicating. The problem isn't that they can't communicate. The problem is what they are communicating very effectively. What they're often communicating is mistrust, contempt, anger, condescension. they're communicating a bunch of things that is just plain damaging. And the issue isn't that they need to learn how to be condescending more politely. That won't help. They actually need to learn how, wondering, why are you feeling that way about somebody that you love, that you also love? What is making you that angry? What is making you, where are those attitudes coming from? Because if you actually can look into that and discover that, oh, you don't have to be angry. You could perhaps be annoyed, but not angry. Or you could just perhaps find it's funny because you actually appreciate the other person. Then you won't be expressing those nasty things so effectively. You'll be expressing nice things effectively, be expressing love and trust and cooperation and grace, all kinds of things that strengthen a relationship. So that's what I mean by it's not about communication. When people are looking for, communication techniques, and then there's another irony about that, which is if you are freaking out, no amount of communication rules will help you because your brain won't know to follow the rules. And you already know to follow the rules. The problem is you're freaking out. If you're not freaking out, the rules are silly and cumbersome. Can you imagine you're having this really intimate time with your wife and, whether it's sexual or whether it's just a lovely experience together, and you have to you have to exchange a talking stick or something like that? That's not how it works. Or you're in the middle of some deeply emotional situation and you have to craft how you say everything. That's not how it works. So in general, the rules are great, except for when you need them, you don't have them available. And when you don't need them, they're ridiculous. So that's what I mean by that title.
It's one thing that I've taken to heart for myself, and I'm still working it out. It's just understanding that even though my first reaction is valid, it might not be the right reaction to a situation. So it's working that out to make sure it's not taken the wrong way, but not walking on eggshells either. Because it's one of those deals where it's like I want to be true to how I'm expressing, but damn, if I can't curse or I can't express in my own way, then that puts a lot of pressure on me. And I feel that it's not annoying, but it's more of I'm not true to express myself the way I want to if a person across from me isn't willing to accept how I express myself, as long as it's not in a violent or demeaning way.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how people talk to each other, it's always a particular, every conversation is particular to the people in it. And we all know this. I mean, the concept of code switching that people talk about a lot, that, that depending on who you're with, you are making, without even necessarily being conscious of it, you're making certain cultural assumptions having to do with, relative position. How formal is this meeting? How informal is this meeting? All of that stuff comes into play. Being considerate isn't necessarily stifling yourself. The way I remember, it's funny, when my kids were little, I also have 3 boys, by the way. When my kids were little, we and their mom and I generally didn't care if they used certain words. It was okay for them to utter certain words. We didn't say, oh no, that's a dirty word, you can't say it. We would always make a big point of saying you have to be considerate in how you use them. So if you're going to use a curse word, it better be in a context that isn't abusive. So you're not going to say F you to somebody, though you might use the word if it comes up in context or something, or if you just want to speak colorfully. And so, they always learned that. And they also learned certain words, if you say them at school, you're going to get in trouble. So you should realize where you are. Certain words, if you say them in front of your grandparents, they have different feelings about those words than we do. So don't say those words in front of your grandparents. You should be considerate that way. And so that wasn't, stifling them. That was just instructing them into how to be considerate of other human beings.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that, because it's with my middle child. I don't want to like demolish his humor, but it's like I told him, I was like, look, I said, dude, man, you got to read the room. You want to be funny in school or anything like that, but then, a teacher may not, the teacher could be hypersensitive about certain topics, or you say something and they take it the wrong way and twist it. And I said, look, man, I was like, I'll defend you to the death, but it's like, I'm going to call you out on your crap if you are doing something you're not supposed to. And joking around in school is one thing. And then with jokes, like I'm a huge fan of comedy, and it doesn't bother me when a comedian it's pushing the line. And I told him, I said, look, I'm into all of that, but you're a kid in school and you're going to come up against a lot of people who are in a system that is, they know what to listen for, to say like, no, this is not socially acceptable.
Yeah.
When you're
Well,
just
and of
trying to
course,
crack a joke.
yeah, school is going to be set up with some very careful boundaries because they're dealing with a very widely
Yes.
diverse population, and you never know what's going to offend people. We just last night, my wife and I watched there was a 2-part thing on Mel Brooks, a documentary on Mel Brooks. Talk about people crossing, pushing the line. He was just astonishing and hilarious in lots of ways. And he, that notion of comedy, because he's a hugely funny guy, but he also takes comedy very seriously. He was really expressing some important stuff with comedy, especially by breaking a lot of the rules, many of which he can never get away with now, but did, 30 and 40 years ago.
And I love it because it sets the tone to have a conversation. Like, oh my God, like I relate to that, or I'm offended by that. Okay, well, I'm curious. Why? Like, why? And what's your perspective on it? Like, let's have a conversation without, wrapping our hands around each other's throat.
Yeah.
And that goes into the relationships, because you're having a conversation and it's like, whoa, like, hold on. You can have a perspective. You lay it all out there. So am I. Like, why are you tearing me apart?
Yeah.
And I've seen couples like that, and it's just argue, argue, argue. Like, dude, we came here on a couples night, and all you guys are doing is arguing. Like, no, come on, save that shit for the house. It's like, let's go have some fun. This is the point. That's why we're here, is to avoid that with each other and make some good memories.
Yeah. A lot of that arguing is that it is difficult for people when they reach a certain level of freak out to be curious. You know what I mean? It's like, wow, you're saying something that is very different from what I'm thinking. Let me hear more, as opposed to I have to shout you down and, convince you that you're wrong. I want to actually, in that context, if I may, I want to give a shout out
Of
to a
course.
couple of organizations I like giving shout outs to, because they're all about getting people to talk with curiosity across big differences. So one of them is called Braver Angels, and they were formed in 2016, and they were formed by, among other people, one of the founders was a couples therapist, a guy named Bill Doherty, and they are set up. They're a national organization now. They're set up. They have conversations across the political spectrum, trying to get people to actually listen to each other rather than scream at each other. And another one is called the Pro-Human Foundation, and they have a similar kind of mandate. The Pro-Human Foundation was originally founded by a black man who decided he didn't understand why people who didn't know him would hate him. So he actually went and ended up befriending the Imperial Wizard of the KKK, if you can imagine that.
I think I heard about that,
You've
that he
heard
sat
about
down
it.
and have a conversation with him, and that the guy, I guess, stopped being part of the organization.
Yes, yes. And he
Yeah, I
now
heard about that.
he has a collection of dozens and dozens of robes that people sent him because they've renounced white supremacy, because they actually got to know someone. And the key point there was he didn't go
Wasn't he a
yell at
cop?
them. He didn't say again.
Wasn't he a cop? A police officer?
No, I don't think so. No, he's a jazz musician.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay, yeah. Yeah, I'm
yeah.
thinking of
And
somebody
so,
else.
yeah, so the key aspect, his key method was respect. He would actually go, he wouldn't yell at people or put people down. He would go and ask, like, what's this about? Because, it's interesting when there are people who have been in organizations like the KKK who have then renounced it later, they will often point out that what convinced them, when they were in it, they didn't think they were causing harm. They thought they were defending something important to them, but they didn't realize they were causing harm. Yelling at them didn't convince them that they were causing harm. It just convinced them that they had enemies. But actually being treated with respect opened their eyes. They would say, "Oh my God, some of the stuff we're saying here, I can see it's causing harm to somebody that I can now respect." And so that's what let them get somewhere. I like to give a shout out to that, even in the context of talking about couples therapy, because that's what couples therapy is all about. It's a lot about actually being able to back away from freak out, you're going to feel anxiety when especially somebody super important to you is saying something that they're having trouble with, especially with you, you're going to feel anxiety. But if you can back away from freak out enough to actually be curious, you can get to, it's one of my shticks. I like to call it the oh shit moment. What do I mean by the oh shit moment? It's not, oh shit, I just hit my thumb with a hammer. It's not that one. It's shit, that's what's going on here. That's what you're saying. I didn't realize that. Wow. And the reason I call it the oh shit moment rather than the aha moment, because, aha moments are great. It's like, we've solved it. The oh shit moment, you haven't solved it yet, but you stop fighting about it. You say, oh, shit, I didn't realize that, but that's where you're coming from. Well, we still don't agree, but now at least I understand where you're coming from. In other words, we're both valid here. Even when we disagree, maybe we got a shot at working this out. And then when you can do that, you can have what I just call in general an intimate conversation. That's what I mean, an intimate conversation. You actually hear each other. You can be yourself in the presence of someone else being themselves. So when you can do that, you never know how that's going to proceed. And you may have had that experience. I think most people have, if you think about it, where you go into something thinking, I got to convince you that it's got to be my way, have the conversation and realize, now that I think of it, actually, I will be a lot happier putting a smile on your face right now. It's like, no, I'm not giving in. I'm actually saying, let's make it win-win. Let's do it your way. It's cool. Or even, no, we still don't agree, but at least we don't have to yell at each other. I can respect where you're coming from. Let's figure it out.
No, you're absolutely right. I love when I see couples do that because I've been through that, and especially for a man when he is seen properly by his significant other.
Mm-hmm.
When he's seen by his significant other about what he's going through, what he has to endure, what he has to face every day, and then come home and in his own perception feels like he's not safe. And that really changes the dynamic because it's like, okay, I could come home to someone who understands me, who sees me, who will show me their compassion, give me grace if I'm making mistakes, and just let me know, like, you know what, I'm a good man, even if I'm flawed, and I am doing the best I can. And when a man is seen like that and to be understood in that way, you see like the shoulders get a little lighter, stands a little stronger, and it's like, I someone has my back. Holy shit, and
Yeah, and I think that same man is more likely to then want to please his wife. You know what I mean? It's a lot easier then for him to become generous, become giving when he's feeling, I hear what you're saying, when he's feeling seen and understood rather than being judged harshly for, because that doing the best we can is kind of the essence of forgiveness, I think. That's when I wrote a book, not this past book, but the one before, called Betrayal and Forgiveness. And
yes,
what I mean by forgiveness is all about that, actually. When I say forgive, I'm not talking about necessarily restoring the relationship or even trusting someone. But when you recognize, wow, you have to start by forgiving yourself. When I realize, wow, I wish I hadn't made those mistakes. I wish I had seen it sooner or whatever. But when I really think about it, knowing what I knew and not knowing what I didn't know, I guess I was doing the best I could. That's what I mean by forgiveness. And when you can extend that to someone who's hurt you, you can say, well, I wish they hadn't hurt me, but given who they were and what they were thinking and where they were coming from, that's what they came up with, isn't it? They were doing the best they could too on some level. I'm not justifying bad behavior, but I'm just saying that's what forgiveness means. It's like, okay, I don't like it. You shouldn't have done it. It was wrong. Don't do it again. But I can understand where a good person could possibly screw up that way. And that's what forgiveness is all about. It's that level of acceptance.
absolutely. And you often compare couples therapy to improvisational theater. How does that make you want couples to show up in a session or around their own home and their family?
Yeah, I like that question. Yeah, the reason I call couples therapy improv, the first session I do isn't. The first session I do, I structure quite a bit. I have particular stuff I like to talk about. I like to go into a little mini lecture about stability and intimacy as both needs. And I go on about that stuff for a bit. And, I'll often see a light bulb moment then. People will say, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way, which is really where you want to get people in therapy. If they're just going to think the same thoughts they've had, you're not doing them any good. So getting someone to this, like, wow, that's a way of thinking about this I hadn't thought of before. That's really useful. And then once we've sort of established all the, I do a family diagram, I get some background information. And then once we get going, and my initial question for folks, once we've done sort of a little bit of initial stuff, is how will you know if this is helping? I focus them right in the beginning, like, what is better going to look like? And, how will you know? All of that said, from then on, after we've done that, my little mini lectures and all that stuff, it's improv. Now, what do I mean by improv? Now, I'm not trained in improv, although a couple of my kids are. And I've seen folks. Have you ever done any improv yourself?
I've experienced it, but doing it, no.
Yeah, I've done just a very little of it. But the one rule of improv is yes and. Yes and. What they mean by that is somebody says some silly, ridiculous, the funny thing about improv, it's funny because people come up with ridiculous things. You never say, nope, not that, but this. You always say, you go with whatever you get and you add something to it. Yes and. When couples first come to see me, they are not in yes and mode. They are in no damn it mode. That's where they are.
Yeah.
I, however, can be in yes and mode. Whatever I'm hearing, I'm saying, well, I'm basically, and I'm not faking this. This is genuine, or it doesn't work. I am just interested in where they're coming from. Like, wow, you cheated on your wife. I'm not going to say, oh, that was just fine. Of course, we've all generally agreed by that point that it wasn't a good idea. That was wrong. But what was happening for you? Like, what was going on? Genuine curiosity. And that encourages over time and encourages the couple to get into yes and mode as well. So I like how you extended the question to, like, what does that look like in their relationship? When a couple is in that sort of mode, they're having fun with each other. They're relaxed with each other. They're not walking. It's the opposite of walking on eggshells. It's like, I don't know what's going to come out, but it's coming out of a place of goodwill. So it's not going to be mean. And it might be funny, or it might just be regular old. Who the hell knows? Couples that laugh with each other are in that spirit. That's what improv theater is all about.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with that. Now, with your newest book is Betrayal and Forgiveness, How to Navigate the Turmoil and Learn to Trust Again. When betrayal first comes to light, what does triage look like before anyone makes any big decisions?
Yeah, a great question. I just want to throw in something. I think it was quite a while ago we arranged this interview. I have another book out since then, just saying, called The Passion Paradox. I'll talk about that a little later. But yes, betrayal and forgiveness. So triage it's a great way of thinking about it. Yeah, when people, now, of course, I'm a couples therapist, so generally I'm seeing the couple. They may have already gone to, sometimes one or the other of them or both have gone to individual therapists too. But as a couples therapist, what I am doing is really initially focusing on trying to lower the panic level more than anything else. Both parties, usually when they've come to see me and it's a recent, when it's a recent discovery, and I'll sometimes see people as few as a couple of days after the discovery. So they're, the person who just got hit with that, the person who was cheated on, is often still somewhat in shock. And so the early work is a lot about finding ways of calming things down enough, not sugarcoating, but just sort of getting it to the point where they can actually think a little bit. So that's the earliest part of the work. More often, it's not just a couple of days. More often, I just met a couple this past week where it had been, I think, 3 months since the disclosure or something like that. They'd been working on it individually for a while and they were ready to work on it as a couple. So they're not in acute shock anymore. So at that point, what I'm getting into is how do they understand what happened? Because essentially, if you think about how you're going to have to get through it, you're going to have to figure out, all right, what happened and can they get to that place of forgiveness? And again, by forgiveness, I'm not talking about restoring the relationship necessarily. I just mean, can they really, when I'm using the word forgiveness, I'm just saying you're no longer in shock when you think of it. You can entertain some possibilities about maybe I can understand this, even if I don't understand it yet. That's often where couples are. That couple I just mentioned, where it was 3 months, I just saw them earlier today, and they, for the second session, and they were at that place of saying, okay, how, especially the person who was cheated on, how can I understand this? It's really hard. They're wanting to stay together. Don't know yet if they can do it, but that's what they want. So forgiveness is that after you get past the shock, you want to be able to get to that place of accepting what happened without freaking out. Then you can figure out, all right, do we want to actually trust each other? Can we rebuild trust? And that forgiveness is an individual job, really. Trust takes both parties. And that what helps build trust is when they are able to have intimate conversations. In other words, when neither one of them is walking on eggshells anymore. Often the groundwork for an affair, it's not the only reason people have affairs, but often the groundwork for an affair is that intimate communication, and often sexual intimacy too, was somehow not working. It was compromised. A lot of times what couples will do is they'll avoid talking about anything that might rock the boat too much. And the trouble because they want to protect stability. Stability is really important, especially when you have kids. So they'll do that over time. And the trouble is, over time, that means they start walking on eggshells. And one of the symptoms of that is they maybe are arguing about anything and nothing that comes up because they're so on edge with each other. Or sometimes one of the symptoms is an affair. Or sometimes one of the symptoms of lack of intimacy like that is somebody just blindsides the other by saying, I'm out of here. And, without even discussing it. All of those are possibilities. So a lot of the work, if they can get to that place of sufficient forgiveness to be able to not freak out with each other, a lot of the work is then, how can you rebuild trust? Is it possible can you forgive someone to the point where you can also say, all right, I can respect you and I can restore your dignity in my eyes? Because most people don't want to stay with somebody if they have if they're so angry with them or contemptuous of them. That doesn't work. And then on the other side, people don't want to stay in a relationship where their spouse is their probation officer. That tends not to be a very fun relationship.
And this is where we get into the faith question. You write that faith, not ideology, unlocks kindness and calm in relationships. How does that kind of outlook change a heated conversation for couples, to expand on what you've already touched on earlier in the interview?
Yeah. That contrast between faith and ideology, I think, is a really important contrast. The thing about ideology, what turns ideas into ideology, at least as I define the terms, is when the ideas harden so that it's no longer, what ideas do is they open you up. I have ideas, you have ideas, your ideas might disagree with my ideas. And if they're ideas, I'll be curious. I'll be saying, hey, I hadn't thought of it that way. Tell me more, expand on that. Ideology is where you have to defend the ideology. It's no longer about actual ideas. It's about the ideology has to be defended, and anybody who disagrees with it has to be opposed, either by yelling at them or arguing with them or in war, killing them. It can really be horrible. So ideology is sort of the opposite of faith, because faith says nobody knows everything. So, a faith perspective, as I'm defining the term, says there's no point. If I have to have a certain degree of humility about my ideas, that's what I mean by faith, because I'm not God or whatever, however you want to use the term. So just that, when you apply that to a couple, if a couple is approaching a situation with that sense of faith, with that sense that says, and again, let's take the example of a betrayal, which often happens. It was one of the things I noticed when I came up with that formula, be kind, don't panic, and have faith in the first place. Couple comes in and let's say they're dealing with infidelity. The couples that would come in and say, we can't stand this, just have to make sure it doesn't happen again. And the one who was cheated on is saying, yep, we got to check his phone or her phone, whatever it is, and make sure it doesn't happen and monitor what they do. And the other person is saying, I'm really sorry, I must have been crazy, never mind, let's go back to how it was. That is the opposite of faith, because they're saying there was nothing meaningful about this. It doesn't reflect anything. Forget about it. Make it go away. La, 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 la. They just don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
A couple that comes in with faith they're in pain too. Don't get me wrong. Oh my God. When somebody's been cheated on and somebody's been busted as cheating or has confessed to cheating, they're in a lot of pain when they're talking to the likes of me, they are. But a couple approaching it with faith, I've heard people say this, like the person who was cheated on. I know, let's say it's the woman who was cheated on, right? I know he's not a bad guy. I'm so hurt that he did this, but we're going to have to understand it. We can't go back to how it was. There must have been something going on that this was meaningful, because I know he's not crazy and I know he's not evil. He's not a psychopath that's just trying to manipulate me. I know him to be a good person. And I understand good people can do bad things sometimes. So we better understand this. That's faith. That's what I mean by faith. A couple that can do that, first of all, can not only get through a huge crisis like infidelity, just in day-to-day life, they can tolerate each other's differences. They can say, oh, I wish you hadn't done that, but tell me more about that. Maybe you had your reasons, and they can forgive each other for doing silly things. Another a podcast my wife and I did a couple of years ago was, I think it was, we were going to have a guest, actually. You'll relate to this. And the guest no-showed. Turned out they had a family emergency. So we're sitting there thinking, well, we want to do a podcast this week. So I said, oh, I know. Let's talk about the one skill that solves all relationship problems. And my wife, being smart, looks at me and says, really? Because she knew that was kind of BS. But I said, no, really, let's talk about it. So what is the one skill that solves all relationship problems? It is the ability to be mildly annoyed rather than freaking out. Because the one thing that is constant about human beings is, God knows, we're all annoying. I know I'm way more annoying than my wife is. She needs that skill a lot more than I do, because I'm more annoying. So she needs the skill of tolerating it much better than I do, because she's not annoying that much. So I don't have to develop that skill. And notice, by the way, that's a good point for guys, by the way. Good tip for guys. Just assume we're more annoying. It's a lot easier for women. And we are. We can be annoying as hell. So, but when you can smile about it, when there's lots of goodwill, when a couple loves each other and is relaxed with each other, of course they're still annoying, but they laugh it off because it's silly. The gratitude of having someone you love is so much greater than the annoyance. So that's that. Yeah, go ahead.
No, please finish your thought.
Well, I was just going to say that applies back to your question about, if you have that kind of faith, then you're not going to be having these knockdown, drag-out arguments. You might well have differences, might even have arguments in the sense of you're passionately arguing for your side, but it's not going to have this sort of edge of annihilation about it. It's going to be like, it's not life or death. It's like, well, I really think this and you really think that. Isn't that interesting? It can be kind of sexy. It's like, wow, well, of course we have differences. That's good. Vive la différence. That's what it's about.
And to have somebody curious in your differences, that's a good feeling.
Yes, it is.
I've experienced that. Like, oh wait, you're not just gonna get mad about it. You just want to talk about it, and you're curious to the point of not creating ammunition for yourself to use against me, but more of an understanding. No, I had and sorry about that, because like I said, under the weather. But I have a curiosity with what you said about when, in your perspective, well, the setup that you did with the couple. Now, the woman, like you said, the woman is curious about why, her mate cheated. And how do you make them aware of, like, look, you're opening up this door to someone who might be shining light on a piece of you that you may feel, or they felt, push them to say, you know what, I want to, have an affair with someone, or one night stand, or etc. And do you kind of preface that with saying, hey, look, if you're asking that question of them, understand that the sword swings both ways.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you,
I think it's implicit in the whole setup of the meeting. I'm curious about everybody. That's kind of the improv theater approach. Whatever comes up, and I try to do that with radical respect for both parties. That's really what it's about. So indeed, I will ask whatever occurs to me to ask if I think it's a useful question. I'm not just going to ask for the sake of asking, but if I think something is a useful question, for example, it's always interesting when you're dealing with infidelity, because the faith I was talking about, where I was talking about this couple, the woman is saying we need to understand it. There's a thin line between understanding the context and justifying bad behavior. And I've had people who are the ones who were cheated on who will say, what do you mean you're wondering, like, what was he thinking or what was he doing? You're just justifying bad behavior. You're just making excuses. And I try to be very aware of that. And sometimes I'll mention that. I'll say, I realize there's a thin line. We need to look at the context. And there's a thin line between that and making excuses. And of course, where that plays out, and it relates directly to what you were asking about, where that plays out is to recognize that both parties are part of the context. And sometimes there is a sense there that a person who cheated was doing so as a way of saying F you to a partner that they felt was being nasty to them. That doesn't morally justify it, but it's part of the explanation. It's part of the context. And very often the person, let's say again, it's the woman who's cheated on, very often she will be saying, have I been nasty to you? And genuinely open it up. And sometimes he'll be saying, well, yeah, you're constantly putting me down. Sometimes not. I've sometimes met couples where, just recently I met a couple where one of the issues that came up, I find it kind of fascinating. The woman was so competent that the guy felt sort of useless, and he ended up having an affair. And there's nothing wrong. She wasn't doing anything wrong, and he wasn't thinking she was doing anything wrong, but he just felt so bad about himself because she was so competent. And, she was earning more money than he was. She was more successful than he was. And he loved her, and she clearly loved him and respected him, but he couldn't deal with it. So again, that didn't justify it, but it was interesting. They found it interesting to consider that. It's like, oh, what do you do with that? She's not going to turn incompetent. That wasn't the point. Yeah. The point was he had to start having some confidence in his own worth and not be a jerk about it. That he realized that. But I'll go wherever it seems to. I'll follow the meaning. That's kind of what I'm doing, which again is sort of a little bit like improv theater. You just you follow the thread where it goes.
And I can imagine with each couple, it's always a different dynamic.
Yes.
And so, yes, of course, you have to have a vein of improvisation to deal with all these different perspectives, the different traumas that's being brought to the table, and that's influencing their relationships and things of that nature.
Yeah. Yeah. And I am very much guided. It's not like I'm saying we just have a free-form conversation and I have no guidelines. I have a lot of experience, of course, which has helped, and a lot of training, which has helped. And it's interesting because I've got trainings in bunches of different modalities. And this is in part having been in practice for over 30 years now. Part of that experience you learn, when you're in a training, even if they say otherwise, the implication of the training is, by golly, this is how to do it. And you better, you have to learn their methods or whatever you're being trained in. What you learn with experience is you can take some of that, you can learn from all of it, but don't slavishly follow all of it because it doesn't work.
Very
and
true.
And it is one of the pitfalls, actually, if you get too enthusiastic about your own methods, and I'm as prone to that as anybody else is. We can all be too impressed with our own ideas. If you get too impressed with your own ideas, then you're not hearing people anymore. You're just fitting them into your little boxes. And my guiding principle, as much as I'm able to, except when I blow it, I suppose, my guiding principle is to treat people with radical respect and not put them in little boxes. And I have my ideas, and I also try to be very transparent about whatever ideas I'm putting out there. I don't claim to be an expert in how people should live their lives at all. I do claim some expertise in how to have these kinds of conversations that are useful. But I'm not even thinking what people ought to do in their lives. Never mind telling them that. I'm not even thinking that. You're the expert in your life.
No, it's true, because, sometimes those boxes can get really tight. And with your recent work, including the passion paradox, circles back to the idea that we crave both safety and excitement, which often pulls in opposite directions. how can couples practically honor both needs without feeling like they're constantly failing at one?
Yeah, that there is the there's the question. You know what I mean? That
Paradox.
basically that summarizes it. Yeah, and those you talked about, safety and excitement, and the terms I usually use, stability and intimacy. That feeling of, yeah, you need to privilege them both. And the reason I wrote a book called The Passion Paradox, the paradox I'm referring to is specifically both are needs, but the skills you need conflict. And yet they're both needs. And the answer is not to compromise on them. The answer is somehow to live with the paradox. So sometimes you're going to be taking a risk of being honest with your partner when you're pretty sure they won't like what you have to say. And maybe sometimes you will say, no, I'm going to pick my battles. All of those things are valid things to do. But to be aware that to feel alive, you have to not feel stifled, but also you need to not be a jerk, right? So, and you need to respect the other person's need to feel alive as well. That is the work. That is the work of being a couple. That is also the work of therapy, is learning how to, again, I don't even like to talk about balancing the needs. It's learning how to fulfill both sets of needs in the presence of the conflict.
And do you get a lot of couples and how do you get them out of that just live too much in the past, and on top of that, having their worry of future expectation?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the living too much in the past thing comes up a lot because, and people often say, they'll say, well, we went to a therapist and the therapist said, make a rule, don't bring up the past. And I'm, with all due respect, no, you're bringing up the past because it's still alive for you. There's something important there. In the present, there's something important there. Why does he keep repeating? It's again, I'm thinking some gender stereotypes here. He's saying, why does she keep repeating that? Why does she keep saying it over and over again? And I will point out, she's only doing that because she doesn't think you hear. And he's saying, well, I do hear. And I'm saying, well, you think you hear, but she wouldn't keep saying it over and over again if she thought you did. So isn't that interesting? I'll bet there's something she's trying to convey that you're not picking up. And of course, to her, I'll bet there's something in how you're saying it that isn't conveying it, possibly because if you're insulting him, he probably won't listen to you very well, stuff like that. So the past it forms who we are, right? We're always there. And and worries about the future are also part of we have these neocortices in our brains, if we didn't, it would be a lot simpler. Our mammal ancestors in evolutionary terms probably have it a lot simpler. I don't know exactly what it's like to be a squirrel or something, but whatever it is, I don't think they're worried about the future the way we are, and evolution is sort of efficient that way. We build on the same physiological structures that other mammals have if they think they're about to be eaten. And so we are apt to panic if our spouse says something nasty, the way we would panic if we were being attacked by a saber-toothed tiger. And so learning how to calm yourself around things like that is a lot of the work. You know who I like to mention in this context is there's a neuroscientist whose name is Jill Bolte Taylor, and who became pretty well known in the, I think it was 2008, something like that. So we're talking about 18 years ago, when she did a TED Talk called My Stroke of Insight. Because when she was in her 30s, which is quite young for something like this to happen, she had a stroke. She had a massive left hemisphere hemorrhagic stroke, which wiped out a lot of the functions of her left hemisphere for, she said it was about 8 years before she got everything back. And so during that time, what she learned, and of course she's a neuroscientist, so who better than a neuroscientist to be able to think about what the hell's going on in her own brain, It was really interesting. And then later, when she got her skills back, she could write about it. So Jill Bolte Taylor, talks about how, and she's pretty whimsical about it, but she means it seriously. We're all at least 4 different people walking around. And these 4 different brain structures, it's only one of them that freaks out. It's the left hemisphere limbic system, the left hemisphere amygdala that freaks out. It's the smoke detector. But the rest of the brain, she said, those other 4, if you learn how to become aware of them, can calm down the part that's freaking out. So that's a skill also that people need to be able to calm down the part that's freaking out. It's an important part of you. We all have to be able to panic. It's an important survival mechanism. But if you can learn how to calm that part of your panic, and it's also about recognizing that when your partner seems to be freaking out, that's only part of them too. It's not all one way or the other. So the more people recognize that, again, they can tend to be calmer. They can build up a store of goodwill. I like to refer to the emotional bank account. They can put a lot of deposits in the emotional bank account, and then they have some room to make some withdrawals occasionally, if there's a nasty comment or something.
So how do you see and how do you deal with either side, either half of the coin for a relationship when they say to each other, well, they should have known. The mind reading aspect, so to speak. Like, they
Yeah.
should have known, or, you've been with me long enough that, like,
Yeah.
dude, no, like, I'm not a mind reader. Just, tell me, express. And I understand the allure of me doing something, and it's an anticipation of something that you're gonna do and things like that. That feels amazing, because when I have that done to me, or I do that to my wife, it's a great feeling. She's doing this, she's doing that, or she's gonna go to the gym when she gets back. Have a towel waiting there. Hey, clear out the cold water. Make sure to run the bath or whatever, or just something to say. Hey, or did you eat? Give her a healthy snack, or anything under the sun. When I get home, she's like, "Oh, do you need anything? Food's done. You want some tea, whatever." That feels great. But when somebody is living in that sort of realm of like, shit, what I have to do for them, or they're gonna come home upset thinking that I should have done this or this or this for them. How do you approach that with couples?
Yeah. Well, a couple of pieces of that. I mean, as far as you should have known, that's, you could read that as somebody saying, I don't feel listened to. And so that, and then, that emotional bank account I talked about, when that gets overdrawn, then anything is just further evidence of how messed up things are. So, everything becomes, you can become real sensitized to any little slight. When there's plenty of goodwill flying around, a little slight is nothing. It's like, oh, you forgot to run the water. Who cares? I love you anyway. It just doesn't matter. So a lot of that is about building up a store of goodwill. And then when it comes to the, sort of, you should have known, or why can't you tell me, or something like that. Well, it sort of fits in the same category. It's like that becomes funny when there's a lot of goodwill.
Right.
It is also serious in the sense that, wow, if what my wife is saying to me is, I haven't been listening well to her, I should listen to that. It's like, yeah, I want to do better at that. Let me see if I can figure that out. And sometimes that is about, it's not about beating yourself up either. It's about recognizing, well, maybe there's reasons why we're not connecting so much. Maybe we need to find some more time to actually sit down and hear each other and put our phones down, things of that sort.
No, thank you. That's a great perspective that a lot of people, you hear that in couple circles and things like that, and they just do that to kind of release the pressure. But it always goes back to the same thing. So I hope that those in those type of situations take heed of your words, and it's something that really needs to be addressed. And just, I've went through it a lot in my past relationships. It's something of me, like, okay, like, how do I get past this? Do I have to be over uh go overboard with having them, I guess, borderline being taken care of? But then it's like, then how is that any fun? It's not fun for me, because after a while it's going to be like, you're a grown person, do this for yourself. Oh, but you always did this for me. Like, all right, come on. So getting older, like how we said, with the experiences and everything like that, like, I would have loved to learn how to draw the line when I was younger,
Yeah.
rather than going through that stress. But then again, it's the experience. It's the experience. You got to live that life. You have to, and then just pay it forward to other individuals and even future relationships.
Yeah.
Now, if a listener wanted to start applying your 7-word formula, what's one small, concrete way they could practice be kind, don't panic, and have faith in a single moment? Tough or not?
Wow. Great question. I suppose it starts with the faith part. Do you know what I mean? That's kind of how the logic of that formula goes. So it's practice faith. And I say practice because faith is not something you can read in a book. It's not a set of knowledges. It's not even a set of true or false statements. Faith isn't about what you believe, the way I'm defining faith. It's not about beliefs at all. It's an attitude. It's a mindset. So practice a mindset that says, okay, here is this person that I love and they're being annoying, let's say, and yet they're valid. I may or may not like their being annoying, but if it's annoying, I guess I don't like it. But I'm so glad to have them practice a mindset that says they're valid to be who they are. I'm annoying. They're annoying. Always a good idea, I say, especially for men to think we're probably more annoying. Anyway, moving along. It's that practice, so practice a mindset of faith. And how do you learn a mindset of faith? Ideally, you do it by hanging around other people who are also practicing a mindset of faith, and I'll bet people, most people do, I think. If you think about the folks in your circle of acquaintances, and it could be like elder type, people, respected elders types, or it could be friends, or it could be, I've mentioned you can learn faith from horses and newborn babies sometimes. That sense of just being present and accepting what is, I'm a sucker for newborn babies myself. Newborns, they're just so completely unscrewed up, they're just there. Yeah. They cry if they need to cry, and they don't if they don't. And they're just doing what they're doing, they're not distracted. They just are. There's something beautiful about that. There's something so quintessential about it. That's what I mean by faith. So to practice that skill. That's, I think, now that's a lot to say in one moment, but any given moment you can practice that skill. Gratitude is a good example of that, and people will talk about that, notice stuff to be grateful for. Even, and it's not just the big stuff. Of course, I'm grateful for my wife and family, and life and health and all that, of course. But I'm also talking about, walking down the street and there's a car pulled out over the sidewalk because they can't see, unless they do that. And they see me coming and they back up, make room for me. That's a moment of grace. And they're supposed to do that, by the way, right? It's not like they're, yes, they are supposed to do it, but it's a moment of grace. It's just a little nice thing that somebody does for somebody rather than not. Yeah. Be grateful for that. Sensitize yourself that way.
Yeah, that's one reason why I'm a dog person, because I love that, that unconditional love as well. You walk in, it's like, oh my God, you were gone for like 2 years. Like, dude, it's 8 hours. Like, I'm back. And all right, let's go outside, let's catch a stick and this and that. Like, I've always been a dog person, and I'm not negating my 3 kids. I love them as having them grow up, learning their personalities, and that unconditional love. You walk in, you hear them scream, "Daddy," and they run to you, and love that feeling. And it's it's something that I've always tried to. That's the feeling that I love chasing. Even though I have a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 5-year-old. So I'm getting that with the 5-year-old, but then he's getting into his own personality. So it's like, but then he's like, "Daddy this, daddy, daddy, daddy." I'm like, "All right, buddy." And then having the experience with the older two, it's, I don't know. Sometimes I look at my older two and they probably think like this a-hole, he loves the baby more than he loves us. It's like, dude, I got practice with you two, and you guys want to F off with the video games and everything. And like, yeah, but give him like a little bit more and whatever, but I show them all the same love. You know, maybe you can relate as a father when it's like you see them coming into their, like, I love them as kids. I love the love, the devotion, everything like that, everything you explain. But my wife told me one day, she's like, "Oh, you're gonna miss all of that." I was like, "No, I'm not." I said, I don't. It's not like we're gonna have another kid. And I said, I love, and I told her that before, I love experiencing them getting into their own skin, their own personality, and helping shape that by, doing the right and wrong and everything like that. And, that's another experience for me, because it's like, okay, I've seen you as a baby. Like, I cleaned you up, shower, this or that, took you out to many different places, went to Disneyland. And I'm like, I love seeing them grow up and becoming who they're going to become, and knowing that I don't want to have an influence on it, but I want to make sure that they realize, okay, my dad taught me this, and
Mhm.
it made me an even better person. My mom told me this, and it made me a better person or a more loving person or this or that or more fun. She's more outgoing than I am. She's not a wallflower. I am.
Mhm.
And it's one of those deals where I'm like, they're taking both good and bad from us, but let's show them more good. And if there is bad between us, then, let's stop doing it in front of them.
Mhm.
Let's just take that off to the side and deal with it. Because I've had fights with her about that. I'm like, stop arguing in front of the kids. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. You think they're not paying attention, you think they're ignoring you, but they're paying attention to everything.
Mhm.
Like, stop. And I see couples like that. I would tell them, like, I said, look, man, from one parent to another, like, I would recommend, and whether it hits you now or it hits you later, don't do that in front of your kids,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
even,
Tends not to.
yeah,
It upsets them if for nothing else. Parenting, of course, is important. It's the most important thing we do, right? I think. I will also note, there's nature and there's nurture, right? And I'm, of course, being a therapist, I'm in the nurture business, not the nature business, but the longer I've done this work, the more respect I have for nature. So there are some kids that are born really difficult to parent through no fault of anybody, a genetic lottery. There are some kids that are born and I think this is most kids, by the way, they're probably going to be okay as long as their parents aren't horrible. You don't even have to be that good. You just have to not be horrible. Most parents aren't horrible. Most kids are wired okay. So most of us turn out okay.
it's true. I've been to the interview I had prior to this last week. His mom threw a knife at him
Boy.
because she was upset, and he was about like between 10 and 15, I think close to 10. He's like, Oscar, she threw the knife with such precision, it just sliced the top of his head, and it's like
My.
almost like a circus type of deal.
Yeah.
Like, are you serious? And just because she was upset, and he went through the same thing. The parents always fought with each other. They took it out on the kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just
That,
like,
that
what?
that fits in my definition of horrible parenting. By the way, throwing a knife at your kid, yeah, not good.
Yeah, it could have went so many different ways.
And yet, there are lots of people, and this may have been true of the person you were talking to, who went through really abusive parenting and turned out okay anyway.
No, he's the way he comes across, and all his kids, and sure, I'm not taking it with a grain of salt. Like, I understand that too. Me going through what I've been through with my own parents, my own father, and going through the traumas that I've been through, I break my back to do my best to be a good father, even though sometimes I have my failing moments, and I admit that. But for the most part of it, it's like, I'm not gonna repeat that. I'm not gonna
Mhm.
repeat that. I'm not gonna, like, when I was a child, I was like, and I even told my mom that, like, when I fell asleep or I pretended to be asleep, and my father walked in and they had a huge fight. She found out, he was cheating on her. He was cheating on her. He had another child with another woman,
Boy,
and
and you were
you
hearing this.
know, yeah, I was in bed hearing it, and that's the one thing I tell my wife. I'm like, stop, like, don't. They hear this, take it all in, and they're gonna be telling this to a therapist one day, and we do want to acknowledge any sort of what may be negativity or difficult moments, but it's like, it's also about showing them, hey, there's a good part of me, but there's a part of me that is a little bit flawed, and I need you to understand something about it, because I don't want you taking your thought processes of what you are seeing and heighten that by like a 10 and thinking that's like insanely negative, and this is how a person is,
Hmm.
when you're going to meet people of varying degrees out in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Kids are going to learn from their parents that we're all flawed anyway. Yeah. You don't have to manufacture moments to do that because we all come up with them, don't we? We're all
Yeah.
flawed. And that's part of what they need to learn too is resilience and recognize, oh, you mean, daddy isn't always fair. Daddy isn't always thinking clearly. Yeah. Welcome to humanity. But we also want to want to, like you're saying, we want to model for them what a good relationship looks like, what a loving and respectful relationship looks like.
Yeah, I actually had to catch myself because my middle kid and we're rushing for the bus, and I have to drive him to the bus stop. It's the quickest way, and in this weather. And he's like, Dad, what about the window? It was snowing, and there's like ice on the window and everything like that. I only cleared like a little space in the windshield, and I'm like, and I'm me being like, with my sort of humor, I'm like, well, then they're just gonna have to learn to get out the way a little bit faster if I don't see them, you know? And he looked at me like, he's like, what are you, a psycho? That's the look he gave me. I said, I'm joking. I'm going to drive careful. We're going to get to where you're going to, and then I'll scrape the rest of the crap off. But yeah, they're going to need to be careful. So do I, and that's the thing where you would hear other stories and then be like, oh no, my dad's a freaking psycho. Like they don't qualify what they're trying to say, even though they look at them like, what are you doing? So where can listeners find your books, tune into Couples Therapy in 7 Words, or connect with you if they want to go a little bit deeper into this amazing work that you're doing?
Well, easiest way is go right to my website, which is simply brucechalmer.com. So if they spell my name right, they'll get it. BruceChalmer, brucechalmer.com. That
Yeah,
has
look on the bottom
information
corner.
about, great. Yeah. That has information about all of my books and stuff. I'm very excited about a video course I just released based on the last book I wrote, The Passion Paradox. And it's a workbook. The video course leads you through a pretty rigorous course. So that information is on my website about that as well.
And I'll make sure I link all of that. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your insight. And this was a great interview. I love it when we have these type of conversations, and I'm guessing you do this all the time. It looks so natural to you, and it's just having that back and forth and understanding. And I like to admit it's like 2 men getting into it about what they do or what they're going through and things like that, because that whole situation of men's mental health and getting guys to understand that vulnerability is not a weakness. It's strength. It's a strength.
Well,
I always say, yeah.
I enjoyed your questions, enjoyed this interview, and thanks for having me on.
I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oscar. That was an impactful episode. They discussed why kindness is more than being polite, why panic makes you treat your partner like an enemy, and how faith, not rigid ideas, but a grounded trust that you can learn from even the painful stuff, can turn a blow-up into a turning point instead of an ending. As you leave this episode, notice where you default to ideology in your relationships, needing to be right, defend your story, or win, and experiment with asking one more curious question instead. Share it with your significant and keep exploring your curiosity. The work gets easier when you're not doing it alone. Adelante, siempre, por tu mente. Forward, always, for your mind. This is the FYI, I Am Damaged podcast.
In a bright green jungle where the tall trees sway, lived a little elephant who felt big fins. Every day Logan loved to splash and play by the riverside, but sometimes wobbly legs made him wanna run and hide. Tommy doing flips like a stormy shaking drum. A tiny voice inside him whispered, what if I can't have fun? Then Brandon the wise monkey smiled from the tree, said, little friend, take a breath, come and sit with me. Feel your feet on the ground, feel your hand on your heart. We're breathing together, that's how courage starts. I am strong, I am safe, I can do this. Breathe it in slow, let it out with a wish. When my mind feels wiggly like a monkey in the trees, I calm my heart down with my breath and my knees. I am strong, I am safe, I can do this. Step by step forward through this, scared and know what if. Even when my tummy feels funny and tight, I can still be brave. shine bright. Next day in the jungle they played a game of tag. Logan felt the nervous pull, his body started to drag, but he remembered Brandon and the tools he had inside. Took a deep, gentle breath instead of running off to hide. Breathe in the sunshine, breathe out all the fear. Stomped his big elephant feet and felt his courage appear. With the wiggle of his front can a laugh so free. Whispered to himself, there's a lion heart in me. His friends saw him smiling as he joined in the game. They asked, Logan, what's your secret? You don't look the same. He said, when my thoughts get loud, I don't have to stay small. I breathe and move my body and I stand up tall. I am strong, I am safe, I can do this. Breathe it in slow, let it out with a wish from my mind. Be wiggly like a monkey in the trees. I calm my heart down with my breath and my knees. I am strong, I am safe, I can do this step by step forward through the skin and the what if. Even when my tummy feels funny and tight, I can still be brave. I can still shine bright. Little heart listening, this song is for you. It's okay to feel scared, that feeling's true. But just like Logan in the jungle so wide, you've got quiet, steady strength living inside. So breathe in slowly, feel your feet on the floor. Let your shoulders soften, you don't need to. Whisper to yourself when the worries rush through. I am strong, I am safe, and I know what to do. I am strong, I am safe, I can do this. Breathe it in slow, let it out with a wish. When my mind feels wiggly like a monkey in the trees. I calm my heart down with my breath and my knees. I am strong, I am safe, I can do this step by step forward through the skin and the waves. Logan showed the jungle and I show the world. There's a strong-minded hero in every boy and girl in the bright green jungle. When the stars shine above, brave little hearts fall asleep, feeling safe and loved.